The lecture's about the working atmosphere in the classroom. It's about a particular aspect of classroom management, about classroom climate, which is something that's very important if you're a student teacher in terms of your quality of life and the extent to which you'll be able to enjoy being in the classroom. The audience are a group of PGCE students. They're about a month into the course. One of their main concerns will be whether the pupils will behave, whether they will do as they're told, whether they'll be able to go in there and teach. I just wanted to talk about a particular aspect of classroom management, a 10-point scale that I've used in working with student teachers to get them to think about the working atmosphere in the classroom, where everybody's relaxed, it's calm, it's purposeful, it's cooperative, and at the other end of the scale, where very little learning can take place because it's noisy, there are pupils being disruptive, and the teacher has limited control. And of course, there are lots of levels in between. The first part of the lecture introduces this idea of the working atmosphere in the classroom as a continuum between the teacher being in relaxed and assured control and things being out of control and unsatisfactory. And it makes the point, or tries to make the point, that one of the key variables is the skills of the teacher. At its best, it's where the teacher is in completely relaxed and assured of proceedings, feeling they can do anything they want in this lesson. And there's no sense of an us and them. The pupils like being in the classroom. We're here together to learn. And that's obviously the best level to be at. In many schools, you won't encounter the bottom levels on the scale. Many schools, it might not go below level 5. But I know, both from my own experience as a teacher and from the research I've done and the interviews with over 120 teachers that I did in this study, there are schools where the level does go to levels 1, 2 and 3, and that's very difficult. And then there are intermediate levels, where you quite frequently encounter a classroom where it's not perfect, but it's not a riot. It's somewhere between the two. If you look at level 6, for instance, on the 10-point scale, now there's no refusal, there's no kids walking out and swearing at you, but you don't really look forward to teaching the class. It often takes quite a bit of effort to get them quiet and listening to you. You feel a bit harassed, and at the end of the lesson you're a bit tired and you're glad it's over. You're sometimes looking at the clock to see how long there is left. Level 5 is a bit worse than that. You'd be a bit embarrassed if the head teacher walked past or the head of department, because quite obviously the lesson isn't fully under your control. Level 3, you dread the thought of the lesson. Your heart sinks as you leave the staff room. And you know that as soon as you walk through those doors, the kids are going to be deliberately misbehaving under your face to test you out. I'll just show you what I call a level 5, level 6 sort of thing. It's from Teachers TV, this. And if you look at it, there's not a riot going on, there's no refusal, but it's not ideal, I hope you'll see.
Man, you are better than us. When on knees, you've got no one. Fabregas, he's got one goal against Leicester.
You'll see a kid get a cricket bat out in a minute.
Down at the dinner table, about to eat when the siren goes off. What do? Do you go straight to the shelter?
No.
What would you do?
Get my key, like I said, and go.
Okay, so get a pen and write that down in the box. And there's a picture of an Anderson shelter to help you out.
Don't have a pen.
See him hit himself on the head with it. Bless them. Yeah. I would argue that that's not uncommon. There are quite a lot of schools where you see classes not fully under the control of the teacher. And this is just 2 or 3 examples of what I call level 10, just to exemplify it and make a couple of points.
On the wall, for example?
Yeah.
Okay.
You post a link on the wall to our coursework page, and then it becomes easier to hand it in and check it, and then
Okay, and of course, yeah, and then it would mean that you can't say, oh, well, I've lost a bit of paper because there isn't a bit of paper. Okay, it would be submitted online. Okay, yeah, certainly that would be one way that you could do it, definitely. What about Facebook chat? How could that be used?
If the teacher's online, then you could ask the teacher for help.
Okay, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So if Facebook was allowed in school rather than being banned in school, then potentially the teacher could be discussing at lunchtime with you as you're typing up your coursework. You might have a question and you just pop the question rather than having to go and find the teacher in the room. Yeah, certainly, that would definitely be a good idea.
Just a couple of points to make from those extracts, that it's not about silence. It's not about kids terrified of the teacher. And it's not that you can hear a pin drop. You can have quite a lot of noise in a classroom. You can have kids doing all sorts of things. It can still be level 10. As long as the teacher thinks, yeah, but I can get them quiet when I want to get them quiet. And that last one I thought was particularly important. The teacher just having a question, answer and discussion session with the pupils. Jimmy, what did you think of that, of what Ursula said? Alan, what about that one? You've got to have pretty good control. You've got to be at level 9 or 10 to do that. If you're at level 5 or 6, that's not going to work. So it's terribly important to try and get to levels 8, 9 and 10. And the question is, of course, what are the factors that make a difference? Now, sometimes it's the time of day, whether it's snowing outside, what the previous lesson was. But one of the big variables, obviously, is the skill of the teacher. And there are issues about which qualities are most important. What's most important at helping you to get better at class management? There is a school of thought, that the sort of Rambo school of class management, that it's actually about battling and wrestling with them and learning through hard combat experience. And lectures, seminars, reading, load of rubbish, you get in there. But I mean, I actually worked with people who taught for 20 or 30 years who that didn't seem to have worked very well. You know, it isn't just like clocking up flying hours and how many lessons that you've taught. I listened to something on the radio that said that extroverts were likely to be better teachers than introverts. So it just made me think. There are about 600-700 of you all together in this lecture theatre. Do you all stand the same chance of becoming good at class management? At the end of the year, or are some of you advantaged sort of genetically, got better classroom management genes, or by virtue of prior experience? You know, you've done a couple of years in the SAS, or you've been a stand-up comedian, or you've done psychiatric social work for a few years. You know. Can anybody get good at this stuff? And what if you are not an extrovert? You're actually a bit dull and quiet and morose. Does that mean you should withdraw now and go into an accountant's job or something like that? You know, a bit of it is about the quality of the learning experience. You know, whether they think it's going to be of any relevance and use to them, whether it's interesting. And I just found that was an important point in my development as a teacher. It made me think that it's important to think of the audience, the pupils that you're working with. It's not just Professor Nunn who made this point about trying to make the lesson interesting. Christine Gilbert, the current Chief Inspector for Ofsted, has argued that there would be less trouble in classrooms if teachers had interesting lessons. And it raises an interesting point, I think, to what lengths should teachers go to make their lessons interesting? Now, you might think that's a daft question. You don't sort of think, I had 2 really interesting lessons last week, so I better have a boring one this week to even it up a bit. Of course, we'd like to make our lessons interesting. But a point made by commentators such as Sheila Lawler and Melanie Phillips is that there's been dumbing down sometimes in education, that we make it into games and playtime, role plays, presentations, drawing pictures in a way that avoids hard learning, what education is really about. I mean, just out of interest, can you put your hands up if at any stage when you're at school you felt you'd been given a piece of work just to keep you busy, to keep you occupied, rather than for learning? Yeah. I remember once in a history lesson, I was told to draw a Roman vase. I don't know what that was about, you know, sort of draw this vase, you know, sort of, it gives the teacher 20 minutes, doesn't it? So, sort of, and we used to have these textbooks at our school, which had these nice little cartoon diagrams in. And they're good textbooks, but one of the things teachers could do is they could talk for a minute or two, and then sort of say, right, I'd like you to get this drawing in your books. And it's great because it took them about half an hour, you know. But there is a question of how often you do that and the validity of the task. I know for a lot of my student history teachers at UEA, their idea of a perfect lesson on first teaching practice is to talk for about 30 seconds and then put the whole of Blackadder on and then for the bell to go, you know, and you sort of through it okay, you survived. But there's a danger there that, yes, it passes the time, But if you do it too much, pupils recognise that you are child-minded. You're avoiding the real teaching. It's a form of appeasement, really. You know, when you first do your lessons, you have to write aims and objectives, don't you, for the lesson? And if you're honest, your aim is to get through to the end of the lesson without anything terrible happening, you know, to get to the finishing line and it to be okay. If a kid says, well, why do we have to draw it? You know, why can't we just stick it in our books? Well, the answer really is because then I'd have to think of something else to do with you for the next 20 minutes. So, you know, this passing the time bit isn't satisfactory in the long term. There is an interesting issue about this thing about engagement and entertainment. It's understandable when you first start teaching that you sometimes have to resort to things that are less than perfect. You know, first placement is about becoming at ease in the classroom, learning how to talk to kids, learning how to plan a lesson. To become expert at subject pedagogy takes time. To become brilliant at making any topic in your subject fascinating to all the children in the class is a long-term agenda. You're not going to master that in the first 3 weeks. So you've got to have coping strategies, things that get you through as you develop your skills of subject pedagogy. My tutor, Martin Hunt, used to say to me, I don't really like you doing copying from the board with them. I don't really like you dictating notes or reading round the class from a textbook. But if it's that or have a riot, then it's the art of the possible. You do what you can. You've got to keep control of the lesson. And that might be the lesser evil. And so there are people like Sue McLennan, who's argued for the use of stirring activities and settling activities. You might need a stirring activity with a very quiet A-level class. They're not contributing, so you've got to get them a bit involved. You've got to make things a bit livelier. I think more commonly on your agenda on first placement is settling activities. Things like writing a few sentences up on the board and asking the kids to just get them into their exercise book. Can you just get those 3 sentences into your book, because that's what we're going to talk about this lesson. And it just gives them something to do which gets them quiet so you can then try and engage them. Martin Hefford made the point that there are low and high value activities in teaching. There are some activities that are the crux of the learning, like prose translation into English from French, writing an essay in history, where it's the hard work, it's where the real learning takes place. Now, why would you ever use a low-value activity in a lesson? Well, because if you use a high-value activity every minute of every lesson, you lose the kids. Some of them will get bored and they can't take it. You've got to keep them engaged. I had a student teacher in my department who every minute of every lesson was doing source work skills with them for GCSE. But they were in revolt. He was losing sight of how to keep them interested in the subject and how to get them engaged. So there's that skill in the interplay of low and high value activities. It's one of the skills you develop as a teacher. One of my colleagues had as a front cover as a book that he'd written a picture of children all smiling and all with their hands up. And I said to him, you can't use that. You'd be done under the Trade Descriptions Act. They mustn't think that's what ordinary classrooms are like. What are they going to think when they go into a real classroom? It's going to seem like the Battle of the Somme rather than this idyllic picture of everybody smiling and putting their hands up. You know, they're going to be traumatized. You've got to accept the reality that there are deficits in the working atmosphere in the classroom in most schools. There aren't many schools where it's at level 10 in every classroom, every lesson of the week. This interesting Guardian headline about pupils misbehaving. It's rather like a dog bites man headline in the paper. You know, it happens every day. Just out of interest, have you ever been in a classroom, either when you were at school as a pupil or in your experiences since, where not as much learning took place as might have been the case because some kids were messing about and spoiling the learning of others? Does that happen to anybody? Is that common? You know, I would suggest that's not an unusual thing. What I really want to say is it's part of the job. You know, it goes with the territory. If you're going to be a teacher, you've got to learn to deal with this stuff. It's no use saying, I didn't go into teaching to do social work. You're the grown-up, you're responsible. You've got to become good at getting kids to behave in the classroom and engaging them in learning. And the sort of golden nugget here, what I want to say, the golden nugget is Jeff Battersby's idea that if there's one thing I want you to remember to take away from this learning experience, it's that there's 2 agendas here. You do have to give thought to the quality of the lesson. The better the lesson is, the more chances the kids will behave. A lot of kids are biddable to the idea of learning. They might not be driven scholars, but if it's pitched in the right way, if it's done skillfully, they'll give it a chance. I can think of loads of classes I work with where there might have been 2 or 3 quite difficult kids, about 70% who would work no matter what, and then 30% who could go either way, depending on which way the wind was blowing. So there's 2 bits to it, 2 agendas. One's to do with engagement, one's to do with how you discourage them from messing around. So there is a control agenda, and you've got to become good at both. It's not enough just to be able to interest them. And why is this so important? It's a major cause of educational underachievement. The second section of the lecture, and perhaps the main body of the lecture, addresses in turn various things that are thought to be influential in terms of how the teacher tries to get a good working atmosphere. There are all sorts of things. It's a very complex combination of factors that affects how pupils respond. A lot of kids don't do as well as they might in education because their education has been ruined by other kids messing about and ruining the lesson. It doesn't just affect the outcomes of lessons, it affects what goes into lessons. Because once a teacher's at level 5 or level 6, they start thinking, well, I'm not going to do group work, I'm not going to do discussion, I'm going to get the heads down, plenty of written work, we'll watch a video, we'll do work from the textbook and so on. And it's very unfair, I think, whether a child is at a school where, on the whole, the lessons are under the relaxed and assured control of the teachers or not, is one of the major inequalities in education in this country. But the main thing, the bottom line, let's be instrumental about this, is the effect it has on the quality of your working life. Because there are very few experiences in professional life less enjoyable than being, in effect, locked in a classroom with 30 kids not fully under your control. And I just want to play you an extract here, which is a representation of a student teacher in a classroom and the sort of things that pupils do with student teachers.
Miss! Oh, Miss, I've had a burger as well, Miss.
Yeah.
Susan, Miss. Oh, my French project has gone, Miss.
Yes, and mine has.
Oh, my French project. Anyone in this class has got that, I'm really going to kill you.
Yeah.
Oh, Miss, this is really important because I've got to hand that in at break to Miss Dubois.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Miss, could you write a note, please, and say what happened?
Yeah, because you saw it, didn't you,
You
Miss?
saw it happen,
Miss.
Miss.
Miss? Miss?
She's gone to get Mrs. Gillis. She's gone to get Mrs. Gillis.
If she gets Mrs. Gillis right, I'm going to say she had a nervous breakdown.
So how do you respond to things like that? Because it isn't fair. The person who comes in and they all go quiet is an established figure in the school. It's not a fair contest. It's not even fair in terms of where you go on placement, is it? You go to school with different degree of challenge in terms of class management. You can't standardise it. You're going to have very different experiences in your schools. What you've got to do is just be as professional as possible in terms of getting better at this. To be resilient, resourceful, to be a good learner, and to handle the challenge as best you can. And that's partly about not just blaming it on the kids in the school, saying, well, it's impossible here, nobody can teach, and not putting all the blame on yourself either. It's me, I'm hopeless. Loads of people find it difficult. Somewhere between the two. A friend in Sheffield who's a mentor said one of her students had a bad lesson and was upset and went home for 2 days. Well, that's no good. You've got to go in and have another bad lesson. Just do your best. It will already be apparent that I'm not the Clint Eastwood of the classroom. I'm not the Bruce Lee of classroom management dynamics. But I did used to teach at what's euphemistically called a challenging school. And certainly if I had a bad lesson, I would walk round the square block of the school. There was a gap in one corner where a kid had burnt the art block down. So there was a missing classroom. And I'd watch everybody else getting crucified, and that just made me feel better somehow, that I wasn't the only person who was struggling. That you go into school, most teachers will admit that it is difficult with some classes. It is hard work, even if you're quite experienced. You can sometimes think of the kids as the enemy, can't you? As if they're the Viet Cong or something, and you're American GIs. Remember, it's not a battle. It's a campaign, okay? Because it's not all over in one day. It doesn't all hinge on what happens in that first lesson. Especially when I talk to NQTs, they were at pains to say, when I did the research, you must tell them it gets better. You know, by the second term, the kids were coming round. It got easier, and in the end, we did get there, trying to get things gradually to improve. And it is a funny sort of campaign, because it's partly about persuading the kids that you're all on the same side, that you're doing your best for them. And I think most of you will find that there aren't just differences between schools in the working atmosphere in the classroom. There are differences within schools, that some teachers seem to get to higher levels than others. So you've got to think, what is it that some teachers do? There's also the question of how much control you want. If you want a palpable air of fear when you enter the room, you might have gone into the wrong job, maybe. Perhaps prison warder or something like that, where there's a bit more scope for that sort of thing. I did, in fact, work with one teacher who did conjure up a whiff of fear. And he was my first head of department. And he was exceptionally good at managing pupil behaviour. I remember once he came into one of my lessons, and a kid had just thrown something across the room. But he denied having done it. He said, "Get lost, it wasn't me, you're picking on it." And at that moment, Harry walked in. They all went quiet. Harry said to me, "What's the problem, Mr. Hayden?" I just told him what problem. And he looked at the boy. He said, "Did you throw that bit of paper?" And the kid stood up to attention, said, "Yes, sir." Straight away. But I think there are some key levels to think of. And we don't want this power and control because we're fascists, because we're control freaks. It's just so that kids can learn. I think a key level is that you can get them quiet while you're talking. And if they're talking while you're talking, you can't relax. That's a key level to get to. Now, it'll be very easy with some classes and difficult with others. In terms of qualities associated with classroom control, we did some research in Manchester about what qualities were felt to be important. And with student teachers and NQTs, they thought things like sense of humour, presence, powerful and effective voice, presence, that sort of thing, that they were the important factors. And it was interesting that more experienced teachers said, you know, it was more about good lesson planning, it was about being consistent and firm, and it was about perseverance, following things up. And the thing I learnt about Harry was perseverance. He was like Javert in Les Miserables. The kids thought he would hunt them down till the end of time. He would sort it out. You know, it is a lot about reputation, not for brutality, but for following things up and perseverance and thinking, no, we're the grown-ups, we have got to sort this out. And that's one of the things that Harry had that got across to kids. Is it about how strict and severe and threatening you are? Some people think, you know, if I go for zero tolerance, and if they think I'm really hard and strict, that will do the trick. And I know it's exaggerated, but I work with teachers who were like that. One in particular, the kids called him Tommy Tannoy. That wasn't his real name, but he shouted a lot at them. And he used to chase them round and do sort of Basil Fawlty, impressions. And when he strapped kids, if you strapped kids, you were supposed to do it in private. And Tommy used to, again, you weren't supposed to do this, he used to stand on a chair to strap them. So the kid would be sort of here with their hand, this is in front of the whole class, and Tommy would stand on the chair with his strap, and he would shout as he came down, going, "Yeah!" Like that, sort of, yeah. Now, you might think, surely this bloke doesn't have much trouble, he's a barbarian, he's like Genghis Khan. But you just think if it's not you that's getting strapped, if it's somebody else, this is the most fun you're going to have at school today, isn't it? When there's somebody's, right, you, I'm going to, a lot of the people I knew who were exceptionally good at managing pupil behaviour had a quiet, calm, firm style. The kids knew they meant business, no bluster, no shouting, no histrionics, just I will do what I say I'm going to do. And it's easy to think, it's either nice cop or nasty cop, Am I going to be hard, zero tolerance, or am I going to be warm and build up relationships with the kids? And of course, it's not as simple as that. It's more complex. And I would argue that there are 4 points on the quadrant. It's not just about strict or lenient. It's also about polite, relaxed and approachable, or aloof-mannered, hostile and narky. And the territory you want to be in, of course, is these two. You can be strict, you can be firm, you can follow things up, but in a polite, reasonable way. And at the other extreme, people who shout a lot and bluster, but don't ever do anything. And the kids know when the teacher's going to do it or not. And you sometimes get teachers, don't you, who say, right, that's it, I've had enough. I won't tell you again. Usually said about 5 times, you know. The kids know, you know, it's minutes on the board, you know. The kids know the minutes are going to come off the board by the time it's about, because the bloke wants to get off. And reputation does get round about whether you follow things up or not. Another common belief is this thing about charisma, that it's about sense of humour. But I think, you know, I'm just going to show you a brief example of what I mean.
No, please don't laugh. People have called me crazy, but no, I'm the great inventor, Nelsonovich. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. I'm going to show you something today that has never been done before. I'm going to attempt to put myself into orbit, pursued only by a little bit of powder, which I will erupt and will send me floating high into the air. I want almost total silence. You get a little flame? Now then, prepare, the moment has come.
Must be great if you have a fantastic sense of humour, if you've just got it and you like that. But you've got to be yourself as a teacher. If it isn't you, it will ring false. Big problem we had at our school was a lot of people tried to be like Harry, but they hadn't got it. They couldn't do what Harry could do. I couldn't do it Harry's way. I had to find a different way of being good at managing pupil behaviour. And I don't think it is about charisma and having a fantastic sense of humour. Again, a lot of the best practitioners were just good lesson planners who were good with the kids in a quiet, calm, serious way. But at the heart of it, it's the kids and the kids learning, not you showing off, showing what a fantastic comedian you are. And I think the best teachers try and put the kids at the heart of it and get the kids performing and achieving, rather than doing it all by their own sort of charismatic brilliance. Another thing, is it about praise and reward? And again, I would say it's not about how much you praise kids, it's how skillfully you do it. Some people use praise like chucking manure on a field. You've got to be sincere with kids. And sometimes a quiet, well done, you read that very nicely, you know, just sincere praise and stinting praise, rather than at the end of a lesson where they haven't been particularly good. Well, you've all been very good, and they haven't been good, and they know they haven't been good. So there's a skill to giving praise. Little rewards, symbolic ones, the golden Kit Kat for the best presentation or the best piece of homework. The longer I did teach, the more I thought it was about how skillfully you talk to kids. There is an art to talking. There's a clip of some student teachers practicing on each other how they are going to talk to pupils when they go into the classroom. And you see them all being stern, in telling off mode or parent mode, as if it's all about telling them off. It's all about anticipating bad behaviour. And it perhaps sends the wrong messages in terms of how you talk to kids. It's what Bill Rogers calls manic vigilance. That you go in there and you're almost expecting them to misbehave. The look on your face, of your body language is, right, I'm looking for any of you. Don't you try it with me. You know, it exudes worry. It exudes nervous tension. And what you want to do is what Bill Rogers calls an as-if voice. You talk to kids as if they're going to do what you say. Billy, can you put the chair and the knife down? I'll be with you in a minute. I'm just going to see Alice and help her with them. Thanks. And you just, you know, and you might not be confident, but you can practice pretending to be confident. Of course I'm not relaxed. If you look at my wrist, I've got a big R written on there with an exclamation mark. It's just to remind myself to try and at least pretend to be relaxed. And I've got a big I for eye contact. Just remind me, just every now and then, to just try and make a bit of eye contact. You can pick things up. It's about being a good learner. This is an example of somebody talking skillfully to pupils, talking in an appropriate tone.
I bet this poor man's Bible. So look at this one. All right.
Can you draw stick men if you can't draw proper men?
Of course you can. All right. There's some more information, okay?
Of course, it's slightly unfair there because he wasn't under any pressure, was he? It's easy to be nice once you've got their respect. And he had to struggle with that class, but because he planned the lessons well, he'd done all the right things, he just had got to that stage, and that's a level 10, isn't it? Where he must feel I can do whatever I want with this class, and the kids really respect him as a teacher. That's the level that we're trying to get to. In the last section of the lecture, I try and consider how much use hints, tips, advice, precepts and rules are. Things like avoid confrontations, always have more praise than blame. How much use is that in terms of, if you're a student teacher, it's actually about a very complex and sophisticated set of skills that teachers need to build up and develop over time. And of course, you'll encounter all sorts of hints and tips along the way. You might even have with some schools where people say, oh, don't listen to what they say at the university, you know, and you get contradictory advice, people saying different things. And you just have to test it out against your own experience. Can you put your hands up if you heard the phrase, don't smile until Christmas? It's a common thing, is it? Be a really miserable, morose, stern person, you know. And some people have that, but do it in an accomplished way of being reserved and formal. And other people go down the route of being, you know, warm, talking to the kids, getting to know them. But none of them are guaranteed to work. Depends on context, depends which class it is, which school it is. And so there are lots of books, handy hints for teachers, and I paid £5 for this, which gave a number of tips. Do you stare longingly out of the windows? Number 13, are you just boring? Think about this, it's important. Do you look longingly at the clock on the wall? Well, I certainly did in those days, you know. There are all these precepts and formulae. Bill Rogers' work, I think, is great. A lot of people say they find his work very helpful. One of his things is, you know, whenever something happens, try and go through this procedure with the class, with the kid who's broken the rule. But normally, the other kids won't behave while you're doing this. There's more and more stuff kicking off, so it's not always practicable. You know, there's not a right point. You know, there is a point on the continuum between being too pally with kids and being too austere and withdrawn. But it isn't just even a matter of finding the right place on the continuum. It depends on your particular strengths and style. With that top one of the things I tried really hard to do when I struggled with the working atmosphere in the classroom, I really tried hard to make at least some bit of the lesson interesting, at least a bit of it. You know, that would just get the kids on side sometimes. But I know a very accomplished teacher in Lowestoft who makes no concessions with regards to entertainment and having a bit of a laugh and showing clips that might be amusing. So we're here to learn, and it's a very ascetic and cold. We're learning history. We're not wasting any time messing about. And it works brilliantly. The kids respect that. So it's what you can pull off in view of your particular characteristics as a human being. So these are all things I remember writing once as bad practice, things you shouldn't do. Certainly I think you should try and follow things up. But I used to say, you know, don't turn a blind eye to kids who are swearing, because if a kid swears and you don't do anything, and everybody else in the class knows that kid's sworn, they're all going to start swearing. On the other hand, Bill Rogers sort of says there's a case for tactical ignoring. If you can pretend you haven't heard it, let it go sometimes, so you can get on with the learning. Over-the-top punishments, you know. Right, 6 detentions, you know. If you do that straight away, you've got nowhere to go, you know. But some people, by being firm in the first couple of lessons, do get across the idea that if you break the rules, I will punish you. Not having a yellow caution card system, just warning kids before you punish them, rather than losing control. Right, you, get out, out of the blue. Often if you say to kids, if you don't sit down, I'll put you in detention, they do it, they stop, you know, clear warning. Over-reliance on talking. Sometimes people think you've got to get the kid to admit doing something wrong. Some of them will never do that. You'll be there till the cows come home. So all these things are, I don't know, it works sometimes, but they're things to just think about in terms of whether they work or not. I remember once I kept a class in, number 18, but by the time it was the end of the day, I wasn't cross with them anymore. So I let them go after 2 minutes. But they'd be on the same bus as their mates. So the reputation would go around the school. Oh, Hayden, he only keeps you in for 2 minutes. So, you know, you've got to try these things out and try different approaches. One of the things eventually I learned to do was if a kid had been really severely messing about in a lesson, to discourage them by inconveniencing them. It took me about 1.5 years to learn that. And 1.5 years in, 2 kids messed about in a cover lesson. So I kept them behind And I said, if you promise not to do it again, say you're sorry, you can go. And one kid had got in a hump and he wouldn't say sorry. So I kept him an hour, and I saw him the next morning. And I saw him at dinner time, and I kept him in. And he eventually realised if he didn't say sorry, I would go on inconvenience him. And eventually, he came and said, sorry, won't do it again. Didn't mean it. But they never troubled me again because the reputation got round. Trying to get these messages across to kids so that they know what sort of teacher you are, they know your boundaries, they know what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and they know you're doing it for their good. Not because you're a fascist control freak, but because you want to do your best for the children in your care. So in terms of how teachers do get better at classroom management, it is partly research findings and reading books. It is partly passed on craft knowledge of experienced teachers. And there is a room for handy hints if you're trying them out, and experience and observation. But the bottom line is perseverance and professionalism and working hard at it. So it's about being a good learner. It isn't genetic. It isn't about charisma and being a great big person with a strong voice. That used to be the old standard, about being able to get better by experience, by watching other people, and by learning from research and reading. It helps if you understand pupils' ideas about what makes them want to learn. That's just a web reference to a site where about 700 pupils talk about what makes them want to learn and what puts them off learning. So just to sum up, there are two agendas. It's partly about this control agenda. You can go in there with the best lesson in the world, but some kids, trouble kids, might still mess about and try and spoil it. So you've got to become expert in discouraging them from messing around. But you've also got to become expert at this engagement agenda, this sense of audience, of getting them to think of the lesson as something worthwhile and relevant and interesting. A few basic points. Just because you're not at level 10 with every class doesn't mean it's all your fault. Depends on context. There aren't any golden rules that always work. What student teachers want is tell me what to do, give me a rule. Often you can't do that, depends on the context. And it takes time. Harry was brilliant at classroom management, but he'd been doing it for 20 odd years. And you have to put in the time and effort. It's about this set of very complex skills that you gradually get better at. Composure. Just practicing being composed and not losing your composure under pressure. Awareness of what's going on in the class. Just developing that skill of thinking, I'll just keep an eye out on that corner. Positioning. There's a skill in positioning yourself within a classroom. Understanding the strength of your position in different situations. If you don't know the name of the kids and you're in the upper school and you work in the lower school, you've not got as much power. You've got more power if there's break or dinner time after the lesson, because you can hang on to kids, it's their time. All these skills take time to become good at, like becoming good at playing the piano. The thing I want them to take away from the lecture more than anything else is that anybody can become good at classroom management. It's not genetic, it's not a matter of your prior experience, whether you're in the SAS or a stand-up comedian. I wasn't very good at managing pupil behaviour when I started teaching. But I got better, I learned about it, and I put time and trouble into it. And the single message I want them to take away is that anybody can become accomplished at managing pupil behaviour, but you've got to be open to learning, you've got to be intelligent, and you've got to invest time, trouble and energy in getting better at it. The real golden nugget is I honestly believe that anybody can become really good at managing pupil behaviour. And if you do get better, teaching's obviously much more enjoyable. And the more authority you've got, the more you can relax and you don't have to punish kids. I can still remember, although it's over 30 years ago, a moment when a class did what I asked them to do straight away. Might not sound much to you, but because of what had gone before for the previous 18 months, the fact that I looked at this gang of kids milling around and said, can you line up quietly in twos or I'll keep you in at break? And they just did it, straight away, in silence. I felt like I'd won the Nobel Prize. This was a big deal. Teaching is a fantastic job. It's incredibly enjoyable and interesting. And I wish you all the best in the year ahead. But it is easier to enjoy it if you're working at levels 9 and 10 rather than levels 3 and 4. Thank you very much.